Hello, my name is Starla Henderson with Fronterhouse Quilt blog, and today we're going to be learning how to make the walls for our outhouse. The things that you're going to need today for this is you're going to need the fabric that you're going to use for your outhouse, just the walls. You don't need the strips today that you're going to use to make your cross planks here. You're going to need applique needles. I use John James Milner's size 11. A needle and a thimble are very personal things, but I like a long thin needle for applique because it's my tool that I use to turn. You're going to need a thimble. You're going to need a marking pencil. I'm using Soline ceramic marking pencil. They mark very clearly and then they erase very well. You're going to need thread that blends with your piece, with your fabric that you're appliquing down. The thread that I like to use the best for this is Mettler's 60 weight machine embroidery thread. It's a very fine thread. It comes in all kinds of colors and it just buries itself in your fabric. You can't hardly see it. You're going to need a ruler for rotary cutting, a rotary cutter, and a rotary cutting mat. You're also going to need for basting an embroidery needle and a heavy duty thread such as this is hand quilting thread. Okay, and you're also going to need your pattern and of course scissors for snipping threads and trimming your fabric. So today what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to do needle turn, basic needle turn applique. We're going to put this first board down. After you get this board down, you're going to work first. This is your middle. It's the turn. It's where your angle starts. You're going to work from this side to here to this last board, and then you're going to start over here and work that direction. That makes your boards look like they lay in the right way. It gives that visual effect of this being on the side. So we're going to lay this board down. After you get this board down, this door is separate. You'll have a hole here when you finish with the outhouse walls. It's just going to be this portion. I'm going to show you on the pattern now. It might be a little easier to see. We're doing this board right here. You're going to then, after using the same technique that I'm going to show you for this board, you're going to do these short boards, then this long board. Then you're going to come back here and work from this direction. You're going to do this board, and then after you get this board laid down, you're going to have two raw edges coming together, and you're going to put this board is going to be appliqued on top of this final board on the front. And then, like I said, you're going to have a hole in it because that's where the door goes. So here is how we do it. The first thing you're going to have to do is measure your boards. And I find my widest one, which in this case happens to be this middle board here, and it is about just almost an inch. It's really about 7/8 of an inch wide, so that I have plenty of room to work. I'm going to make my strips that I'm going to cut 1.5 inches because it's always better to have a little bit too much than not enough. It's very frustrating. So get the fabric that you're going to use to make your walls with. In this case I'm using, this is actually a grass fabric, but whenever you put it down into a thin strip, those lines give an effect that looks just kind of like wood grain. So I'm going to cut a strip 1.5 inches wide. It's already trimmed. My fabric's pressed and ready to go. I always press and I use starch. Gives me a little bit of body, and it makes that crease stay as I do the needle turn. It makes it lay really well. So I've got this. Then I'm going to get my background fabric, and I've already transferred my pattern to my fabric, just as we did in the last video. And because it's in reverse, you have got some little threads here. You have some it's going to look backwards to you because it's in reverse. You're going to start right here. And what I like to do, because, oh, you're also going to need pins. I use these little sequin applique pins. They work really well. They're small and they don't stick me as easily. I have the lines and I need markers, so I will pin 2 or 3 along that line that I'm wanting to baste. And then down at the very bottom you have a pumpkin. Well, you want this to overlap into your pumpkin so that your pumpkin can lay on top of it right here. So that your pumpkin can lay on top of it. That way you don't have any raw edges showing. So whenever I do this, I always start my basting line, probably 1/2 inch inside the pumpkin. But I'm going to mark, so I make sure I get it, about 1/2 inch inside that pumpkin with a pin. Then I'm going to go up here to the boards, and I'm going to mark right in the center of that board, so I know that I need to come at least that far. Then I'm going to take the strip I just cut, I'm going to turn this over, and you can see on this side, I've got little threads, that I have little pins showing through, and that's my marker, and I can also feel them. So I'm going to lay this strip down, and I'm going to feel, and I'm going to make sure I have at least 1/4 inch around those pins on the other side of the pin. Remember, we're working this way. This is this outside wall. So now I know that that's laid in place correctly. I'm going to take more pins, and for right now I'm just going to pin this in place. And I'll pin it 3 or 4 places. Okay. Now, when I turn this over, I can remove my marking pins because I don't need those anymore. And they'll get in the way as I'm basting. I'm going to take my thimble, and I already have my embroidery needle with thread in it, and in this case I used quilting thread. And I'm going to take not really large stitches, but not terribly tiny stitches, and start about 1/2 inch down, and I'm just going to baste on that line with just little running stitches. Nothing very difficult. And I'm going to do that all the way to the end, and when I get to the end I am going to stop and stop my basting, and I don't really knot off about midway of that board, just like I had it pinned. I'm going to go to the end now. Okay, I'm almost to the end now, and I've basted all along this line that I transferred from my pattern to my background. And like I said, I'm going to come back up just in the very center of where that board was, or that board is. I'm going to take one, it's a really big back stitch just to kind of hold my thread there. I don't really want to knot it off because I'm not going to leave it in very long, but that way it'll stay where I've put it until I'm through with it. Now I am ready to turn this over. Just like that. Here we go. And I am going to mark this line. Now, a lot of people don't do this, and you don't have to. If you can see, once you pull out these threads, if you can see your little pinholes, that's fine. My eyes just don't see it as clearly, and I just feel better when I mark this. So I take my sew line pencil, one that I can see. It comes in several colors. This time I'm using white because I can see it. And I just mark real careful across that line all the way down And just for a reference point, I'm going to make a little tick at the end of my threads. Just kind of makes me remember, in case as I'm pulling this thread out, where I want the end of my stitch to be, the end of my knot. Okay, now I've already threaded my applique needle, which again is the Milner's, and I've knotted it. But first, almost forgot, you're going to trim this edge off, and I'm just going to go just a little bit past, fold it back. It's a little easier to trim this long piece that way. And on this one, I'm not going to fold it back. I want to make sure I have plenty to work with there. Okay, now you very likely are going to have too much of a seam allowance here. So you're going to take your scissors and trim it to just a scant 1/4 of an inch. Trim it carefully. You do not want to accidentally cut your background fabric. That is a terrible thing. It's very frustrating. For that reason, I usually use scissors that don't have much of a point to them, just because it keeps me from jabbing the background fabric and catching it. Okay, now we are ready to do the needle turn applique. I'm going to go ahead and move my pins just to the other side of my board, and if they catch on your thread, and sometimes they will mine as I'm doing this, put them underneath. You're going to gather up your piece, and then the very first thing you're going to do, you're going to snip this thread. That's where the knot is. And I'm going to pull that knot away, and I'm going to take my needle, and I'm just going to very carefully pull out a couple of my stitches, of my basting stitches. I still have a line here, and especially on this fabric, I can't see my pinholes. Some fabrics I can see it, some I can't. That's why I've gotten in the habit of this. And I'm going to go in right in that corner where I've made my that little tick. It's like a right angle there, and that way my knot is going to be buried in my seam allowance. And I'm going to take my needle, it's Milner's John James 11, and I'm going to, using the needle, I'm going to just catch that fabric and fold it under to where I can't see the line that I've drawn. Now, my thumb is right here, and it holds that thread for me, and my finger's underneath it. I very rarely prick my finger. You probably will to start with, because I did, but I can tell when that needle's coming through. And I will go back under. Here's where my thread is out, and I'm using a thread right now that contrasts very well with my background, so you hopefully can see it. But it comes out right here. I am going to take my needle, and right underneath where that thread comes out of my applique piece, I'm going to go back under into the background fabric, and then come back up, probably not even 1/8 of an inch away, into the fold of my applique. And then I'm going to, I turn just a little bit as I go, turning it all the way so that I don't see that line. And again, back up underneath where that thread is coming out, about 1/8 of an inch away, maybe even smaller, and pull it. And that is your applique stitch. And you're going to do this all the way down to the end of your piece. Now, when you get down to the end, go all the way to the end. For time purposes, we're not going to do this, but you're going to just keep pulling it out, pulling out your basting stitches a little bit as you go. When it gets too tight for me to actually turn it, then I know it's time for me to pull out another stitch. And I just keep going back up underneath where I just came out and into the fold about 1/8 of an inch away, back up through that fold. You're going to do that all the way down. Now when you get down, well, and as you're going, I find it's helpful to turn it over occasionally, got a thread there, and just check and see if I am staying, you know, pretty much on the line. I find with this method, I end up staying on my lines almost perfectly. And the accuracy is just a whole lot better with this back basting method. Now we will be doing other applique techniques as well during this quilt, because this isn't the only way I do this, but this is my main way of appliquing now. Now you're going to do this all the way to the end. Then when you get to the end, you're going to turn it over and you're going to knot off in your seam allowance, just being sure not to come through the front. And you're going to lay that first board down that way till you have all of it done. And also when you get to the end, you want to knot off right beside where, just right past that line where your board is. You want to go just right inside that line. I'll show you on this pattern. It'll be easier to see. You're going to come right up to here, and you're going to knot right inside that line. Let me show you right here. Knot right inside that line. Because this is a very thin piece, you want to knot just on the other side of this so that you can trim this, and then you can leave fabric here. In fact, I would leave at least 1/4 of an inch past that, so that whenever you get ready to lay this down, you can trim it to where it covers and you won't have any gaps. So that is how you applique down your outhouse, the walls. Thank you for joining me. This is Fronterhouse Quilt Blog, and we are working on our outhouse.